Okay, so you just learned how to find the equation of a line when you're given the slope and y-intercept. And now we're going to take it one step further and get a little bit more difficult. We're going to find the equation of a line when we're given a table. We're still going to write our equation in y equals mx plus b form, that slope-intercept form, but now we have to find it from a table. So we're going to go through examples. Write the equation for the linear function represented by this table. So we have a table, and the first thing we want to do is remember, we're writing the equation in y equals mx plus b form. Remember, m is slope because there's slopes on a mountain, and b is your y-intercept because it's the beginning point. The first thing I'm going to ask you to do is find the slope of this table. So I want us to look at this table and find the pattern in the y and the x. Remember, slope is change in y over change in x. So I start with the y because it goes on top of my fraction. So we start with 1 and go to 4. And I ask myself, what did I do? How did I get from 1 to 4? Well, in this case, we added 3. I'm going to do the same thing in my x column. How did I get from 0 to 1? I added 1. So we know our slope is going to be 3 over 1. And I can actually just plug that in or substitute it in for m in my original equation. But remember, math is lazy. So instead of putting 3 over 1, I'm just going to write it as 3 because 3 divided by 1 is just 3. So far, our equation is y equals 3x plus b. So what's next? We have to find that b value, that y-intercept. Remember that the y-intercept is when x is 0. Now look closely at this table. Does it tell us anything? This table is so nice to us because there's no math involved. We can actually see in that first row, we have 0 and 1. So this table gives us our y-intercept. Our y-intercept is the point 0, 1. So when I plug this into the equation, I can use that 1 as my b value. So my final answer here is going to be y equals 3x plus 1. It's a positive 1 for my y-intercept, so it's a plus 1 in my equation. Let's try again. Write the equation for the linear function represented by this table. Again, we're writing the equation in the form y equals mx plus b. M is our slope because there's slopes on a mountain, and b is our y-intercept because it's our beginning point. I want us to start by finding the slope. The slope is the change in y over the change in x. So I'm going to start with that very first line and go to the second line in my y side. And I ask myself, how did I get from negative 18 to negative 38? Now this is a little bit trickier because there's negatives involved. But I started with negative 18 and then I went to even more negative to negative 36. Because I went even more negative, it means that I must be subtracting. Because I went even more negative, I must be subtracting. So I'm subtracting 18 in this case because negative 18 minus 18 is 36. Negative. I have my y side now, so I must do my x side. This one's a little bit nicer. How do I get from 1 to 2? I add 1. So I can write my equation as negative 18 over 1, my slope, not my equation. I can write my slope as negative 18 over 1. So just like we did in the last example, I'm just going to go ahead and plug that right into my equation. Instead of m, I'm going to replace it with negative 18 over 1. But math is lazy. I don't have to write that divided by 1. So instead, it's just going to be y equals negative 18x plus b. So what happens next? I have my slope. I need to find my y-intercept. My y-intercept is when x is 0. Let's look at this table. It's not there, which means I have to do more work, more math. There's more math involved in this table. Think back to a couple lessons ago. All we have to do is extend this table in a direction until I find when x is 0. So I ask myself, does 0 come before 1 or after 4? hopefully we all know that 0 comes before 1. So I'm going to work my way from the bottom up because I want to go from 4 all the way up to 0. So I start at the bottom and I work my way up. My goal is to get when x is 0. So I'm going to start with my x side so I don't do too much work. From 4 to 3, I subtract 1. From 3 to 2, I subtract 1. From 2 to 1, I subtract 1. And from 1 to the next thing, I subtract 1. What's 1 minus 1? 0. So I can stop. I found 0 in the x column. I don't have to keep extending this table. The table is extended as far as it needs to. But I got to keep going on the y side because I want to know what happens when x is 0. So I have to do all of that work for the y side now. I go from negative 72 to negative 54. That's adding 18. We're going to do the opposite of what we just did in the last slope example because we're going the opposite direction. Instead of going from the top down, we're going from the bottom up. So negative 72 plus 18 is negative 54. Plus 18 gives us negative 36. Plus 18 gives us negative 18. And plus 18 one more time is going to give us 0. So in this case, we have a y-intercept of 0, 0. And I can plug that in to our equation. So our final answer here is going to be y equals negative 18x plus 0. But math is lazy. That plus 0 does nothing for me. It's not an important 0 to include. So you can write this as y equals negative 18x. Either way is correct. But just so you know, if you don't see that plus 0, it's just because, again, math is lazy and doesn't think it's important. Adding a 0 does not change its value. So when you find the equation of a table, you need to find the slope of that table first. Then find the y-intercept of that table. Once you've got both of those, all you have to do is plug them into the slope-intercept form y equals mx plus b. Remember, you're only replacing the m and the b. Good luck.